Welcome. I'm Leslie Mullinex, Project Coordinator of the Pre-K Priority. We're glad that you've joined us today to hear more about and understand these important findings of the Pre-K feasibility study that we've conducted in Forsyth County. Before we get started, I want to invite webinar participants to answer two brief poll questions that you should now see appearing on your screen. Those of you who are live streaming on Facebook may not have this opportunity, and you will be able to see the poll results. These questions do ask for people to share information about your familiarity with the Pre-K priority, and secondly, about your current work setting. This information will help our panelists have a sense of the crowd's knowledge about our topic and how much detail to share during the presentation. So please take a few seconds if you haven't already and participate. And now we will look at the poll results. So the first one was, what is your familiarity with the Pre-K priority? It looks like we have about 60% of the folks tuning in today that have been involved or have some working knowledge, which is great. And 40% do have some kind of idea about it, but maybe not a great deal of knowledge. And we're glad that you're here to learn more. Number two, what's your current work setting? So it looks like we have quite a few folks that are in the early childhood education agency or organization realm. I'm glad to have you with us. You guys are already probably experts in this field, and we hope that some of the things you learned today will help just better inform next steps of expanding this initiative. And we welcome those who are here from other sectors as well, and it's going to be really important as we move forward for all of you to help us with this initiative. I also noticed we've got about 25% of people that are in nonprofit organizations other than childcare. So that's great, because some of those are our partners that we'll be leaning on. And we are hoping to also have more business and corporate partnership going forward. So with that, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of our flow of this session today. We have two panelists joining us. First is Bob Fikema. He is the president and CEO of Family Services, and who has also been instrumental in leading the Pre-K Priority Initiative for the last several years. Bob will provide a short introduction explaining not only the purpose of the study, but its importance to this initiative moving forward. Our second panelist is Elizabeth Lees of Forsyth Futures. She is the Director of Data and Research, and she was the principal researcher for this study and will present the findings in more detail today. Then we'll wrap up with Bob sharing how the findings impact our next steps for this initiative. And lastly, we will take our remaining time to be used for a question and answer session that we hope you'll join us for. This is a time where we really are asking throughout the webinar if you want to take the opportunity to ask a question. Those of you that are signed in, you will see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can use that just down at the far right at any point during the presentation to type in a question, and we'll hold all questions to the end to answer those. And then also you that may be on our Facebook live stream, you can put a comment in the comment section. You can message a question, and those will be compiled as well with the questions we'll look at the end. I'll be facilitating that Q&A session, and I'll use your questions with the panelists. And anything that we're not able to cover today, we'll be glad to get back to you via email with an answer. So as we get started, I also want to note that all the materials that are referenced in this webinar today, and there are several, are going to be up and running or actually already available on our website at prekpriority.org. And following today's presentation, you will also, webinar registrants will receive a copy of the feasibility study summary via email after today's webinar. That's a condensed version of the full feasibility report. And with that, I'm going to hand over the program now to Bob Fikema.
Thank you, Leslie. The Pre-K Priority, as many of you know, is a coalition of organizations involved with early childhood development and pre-K in particular. We came together in 2014 for the purpose of making high-quality, affordable pre-K programs available to all 4-year-olds in Forsyth County. In the fall of 2018, the Pre-K Priority was moving closer to creating a plan for increasing the number of high-quality pre-K programs in the county. But there were many questions that needed to be answered. How many pre-K children are currently enrolled or could be enrolled with the existing capacity in the system? How many child care centers already meet the quality standards that have been set by the Pre-K Priority? Instead of opening new centers, could we just improve the quality of existing centers? And would those existing centers want to participate in a quality improvement effort? What do parents believe is most important in a pre-K program? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, are there enough qualified teachers to expand pre-K in Forsyth County? Fortunately, with a grant from the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, the Pre-K Priority was able to engage Forsyth Futures to find answers to these questions. What we most appreciated about Forsyth Futures' approach was the balance between quantitative and qualitative methods. Not only did they gather and analyze mountains of data from very different sources, they surveyed and interviewed scores of child care center teachers, administrators, and educators, that is those who teach the teachers, and hundreds of parents, all about pre-K. The results of the study are in a 178-page report. Now, we're not going to go through all 178 pages today. As Leslie said, that report is available on our website, prekpriority.org. But what we are going to do is present the major findings of the study. I'm sure you'll find it very informative. And as with any solid study, it answers many questions, and in the process, it raises new ones. So there will be time for your questions at the end of the presentations. Again, if you have a question anytime during the presentation, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen and write it in. And now let me introduce Elizabeth Lees, who is the Director of Data and Research at Forsyth Futures and the Principal Researcher for this study, to present some of the key findings. Elizabeth?
Yes. Hi, thank you, Bob. As Bob said, I am the Director of Data and Research at Forsyth Futures, and I am here to present the pre-K study. And if someone could cue the slideshow. Excellent. Wonderful. So as Bob said, this was the feasibility study for the pre-K priority to get to answer some of the research questions that he had put out for us. And as he said, I work for Forsyth Futures, and we're a nonprofit that studies our community to inform action. And we were just particularly excited about this opportunity to work with the pre-K priority on this project, especially since pre-K is just such an important topic in our community. And as Bob said, we did gather data from a variety of different sources. We felt like in addition to gathering number data, it was really important for us to do interviews and focus groups to get a more complete understanding of what was happening and better explanations of the whys of some of the numbers that we were seeing. And as Bob said, we were able to talk to parents, pre-K program administrators, teachers, post-secondary instructors who are training our teachers, administrators, and students. We also were able to survey more than 700 households with young children and more than 70 providers to get some of the numbers that we would need. So for example, finding out what percentage of parents would be interested in enrolling their children in a childcare program and what number of providers are meeting the quality standards that were set out. We also were able to look at secondary data, and there were a wide number of community partners that were very generous in sharing their data with us. And that saved us a lot of time in the analysis as far as what we were able, or what we had to gather from surveys and interviews. We felt like looking at the population of young children and their families would provide some important context for understanding what the needs of these families might be. And that is why we are going to start the population with a little bit of background information for you all. As you can see from this graph, the number of 4-year-olds living in Forsyth County has fluctuated a little bit over time. This study was conducted mostly in 2019, which means that a lot of the data we're using is from 2018 because that would have been the latest year of data available as we were conducting the study. And in 2018, we had about 4,600 4-year-olds in Forsyth County. As you can see, 2020 is actually the year in which we are projected to have the lowest number of 4-year-olds in our county, and the North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management anticipates that the number of 4-year-olds will be steadily increasing after this year. And this is a really important thing for us to consider as we look at the capacity numbers, because in 2018, we only had 4,600 children, but we could have by 2030 more than 5,000 children in our system. And we'll need to keep that in mind as we expand, that we will need to be in a position to include more and more children in our system. We were also really interested in looking at the race and ethnic makeup of children in this age group. And what we found is that the 4-year-old population in Forsyth County is extremely racially and ethnically diverse. It's actually a majority minority population. And as we were talking to parents, some parents raised a reason or a way in which this is really important to consider as we're planning. Parents talked about the importance of making sure that pre-K settings are spaces that are culturally competent and a good cultural experience as a first educational experience for children, regardless of their backgrounds. So that's something that we should consider as we move forward, is that we will have a good mix of children from different racial and ethnic backgrounds participating in a pre-K program. We also looked at the economic backgrounds of children under the age of, of households that have children under the age of 4 in Forsyth County. And what we found is about half of children under the age of 5 live in households making less than $45,000 a year, and about half live in households making more than $45,000 a year. And if you look at the graph, what you can see is that there's actually a pretty wide distribution of children from different economic backgrounds. And where that becomes particularly important is when we talk about tuition rates and what parents feel like they can afford, because the experiences of children growing up in households that are making less than $20,000 a year is likely to be quite different than the experiences of children living in households that are making more than $75,000 a year. We were also interested in looking to see what number of children, especially 4-year-old children in Forsyth County, are income eligible for the NC pre-K program. And we did this using some of the results from what used to be known as the long form of the census, and based on Forsyth County results. And we estimate that about 2,765 students in Forsyth County, or potential students in Forsyth County, meet the income eligibility criteria for 4-year-olds. Since the 4-year-olds in Forsyth County are relatively small population when you're talking about census data, there's a good margin of error attached with that number, but we think that this is the number it is most probably close to. We were also really interested in looking at the language backgrounds of children under the age of 5. And what we found is that about 73% of children under the age of 5 speak English at home. 22% of children under the age of 5 speak Spanish specifically at home, and 5% of children speak another language besides English or Spanish at home. And what was surprising about this finding is that more than a quarter of children under the age of 5 speak a language other than English at home, which means that as they enter our early childhood education system, they're likely entering as either dual language learners or learning English as a second language, which does have an impact on program design when we think about it. We also found from looking at the census data that about 7% of children under the age of 5 live in households where everyone over the age of 14 has at least some level of difficulty speaking English. And this will have significant implications as we think about parent engagement and what it means to have a pre-K system that is linguistically accessible for all of the parents in our county. We're also, as a part of this study, very interested in looking at the current childcare arrangements and parent preferences. We looked to see where are children currently enrolled in the system, what kind of care are they receiving, how do parents feel about that care, and if given a choice, what kind of care would parents choose? And what we found was that about 67%, or Yes, 67% of 4-year-olds in Forsyth County are enrolled in some kind of formal program. About 49% of them are in licensed centers or homes or unlicensed elementary school classrooms. And an additional 18% are in half-day programs that meet slightly different licensing standards. And when we asked parents how they felt about their children's current care, parents reported that they were generally satisfied with the care that their children are receiving. What we also asked parents was, if cost was not a factor, how likely would you be to enroll your child in a pre-K program? And what we found is that about 91% of parents in our county would be very likely to enroll their children in a pre-K program, compared to the 67% that are currently enrolled, which indicates that there are some barriers that are preventing parents who would be interested in enrolling their children in pre-K. There are barriers that are preventing them from enrolling in pre-K. We asked parents about what kinds of things might prevent them from enrolling their children in a pre-K program. And what we heard the most often was the cost of care, that it wasn't necessarily affordable for them to do so. Parents also reported that limited available slots, lack of full-time care, so that's care that is similar in hours to the number of hours that a parent is at work, overcrowding in facilities, and a lack of year-round care, so care during the summertime, were all barriers that might make it difficult for them to enroll their children in childcare. We also asked parents what they would ideally like as far as childcare settings and calendars for their year. And the majority of parents reported that they were interested in full day care for their child. The majority also said that they wanted a school system or a calendar year that reflected the school system, so where you would have summers off. And this is where I would actually really encourage people who are particularly interested in this topic to look at the report itself. Even the full report has a table of contents, so it provides an opportunity for you to choose topics that you're particularly interested in, or if there's a particular part of this program that you would be participating in, it's a really good opportunity for you to get much more detailed data than we're able to present in just this presentation. And this is a point where that would be beneficial, because here we find that the majority of parents said that they would like a school system year with summer breaks, but on the other hand, we know that a common barrier for some parents would be providing a lack of year-round care. So those are two things that would need to be held together as we're planning out the system. Parents also reported an interest in elementary school setting or private center settings. Secondly, we were really interested in looking at what is the capacity of the current system, how many slots are available, and would there be enough slots available if all of the parents who were interested in enrolling their children in pre-K were to do so? And then what does the affordability of these slots look like? And what we found is that there is open capacity and there are open slots in pre-K programs in Forsyth County. We estimate that at least 560 slots are currently open in the county. And that means that when we did surveys with the providers said, this is the number of 4-year-olds I would ideally like to have in my classroom. And this is the number of 4-year-olds I have. However, if 91% of children were to be enrolled in our pre-K programs, we believe that there would be a shortage of at least 230 and possibly as many as 1,600 slots. So as the population grows and as we do move towards all of the parents wanting to enroll their children in pre-K, enrolling their children in pre-K, we would likely need to build out capacity for more slots. Parents are an interesting aspect of this finding as well, is that parents reported that they did not believe that there were enough slots available. So there also appears to be a mismatch between parents' understanding of where slots are available and of actual availability in the system. So we were also interested in looking at the cost of care. And what this visualization shows us is, if you look at the bottom row in this visualization, we asked parents in our parent survey what they would consider an affordable monthly rate for tuition for a pre-K program. And we found that about half of parents, that's where you see the 50% mark, said that they could pay less than 200, and about half said that they could pay more than 200. But there's a pretty wide range, with the top 10% of parents reporting the most expensive tuitions being at about $500 or more a month. And what's important when you look at this data is comparing it to the rates that are being charged by 5-star and 4-star care and the rows above it. And from our conversations with childcare providers, this also reflects just the cost of providing the care for them to be able to provide high quality programs. But you can see that there's a considerable mismatch between what parents say is affordable and what's being charged. There's very little overlap. So for example, the median parent said that they could pay about $200 a month, but the median cost of 4- and 5-star childcare is about $626 a month. But that's a rate that only 6% of the parents we surveyed reported as being affordable. So this also possibly suggests why we have not the complete enrollment that we would expect based on interest in our county, that there is this mismatch between what parents can afford and just what it costs to provide a high quality program. We were also very interested in looking at pre-K teachers and assistant teachers and what the supply and interests and needs of those teachers were, because there's obviously such an integral part to providing a high quality program. And what we found as we were interviewing program administrators is that they expressed concerns that there might not be enough teachers to meet future demand, especially in an expanded system, if those teachers needed to have BK licenses. As we were interviewing secondary education instructors and teachers, we found that there's also decreasing interest in the field according to current students and instructors. And this could complicate the need to have more teachers in the future, because while we do currently have enough teachers to meet our educational requirements that are being set forth in the pre-K priority, we don't currently have enough teachers with BK licensures or assistant teachers with CDAs to meet the demand if 91% of 4-year-olds were to enroll. We also, in talking to program administrators and teachers, observed many people reporting that recruitment and retention can be a challenge, especially for some of the private programs trying to retain and recruit teachers with BK licenses. And when we asked people, including teachers, why recruitment and retention was a challenge in so many facilities, the responses we most typically got were that the work generally isn't very well paid, that it's very difficult work to do. And when we interviewed teachers, some of them pointed to disagreements or difficulty with management and their facilities as being something that contributes to high rates of turnover. We also found in looking to see what it would take to increase the education of teachers in our community, the primary need that was identified in all of our interviews was and in our survey work was financial assistance, because going to pursue higher education, especially a bachelor's degree for a teacher, is fairly expensive. And teachers do not always make enough in early childhood education settings to be able to pay those loans off. So it's likely that we would need financial assistance to make that level of education economically viable for teachers. We were also really interested in understanding more about providers' willingness and ability to participate in the pre-K priority. And we did this by looking at 3 different aspects of their participation. We first wanted to see what they thought about the early childhood standard, or about the quality standards that were being set forth, and whether or not they felt like they could meet those standards. We also wanted to know if they were willing or able to expand their capacity, and how many providers might be willing to expand their capacity if needed. And then we wanted to know if they would be willing to accept public funding at the local level. So this is looking at providers' willingness and ability to meet the standards that were set forth by the pre-K priority. And we did this by going question by question, or by going quality standard by quality standard. And we provided providers with 4 basic responses to each quality standard. The first was that they are currently meeting the standard, and this is reflected in the green portion of the bars. The orange portion of the bars are those who are not currently meeting the standard, but are willing and able to meet that standard without additional resources. And the purple section of the bar is those who would be only willing and able to meet the standard with additional resources. And then not pictured in the graph would be people who are not able to meet, or not willing or able to meet the standard, even with additional resources provided. And you can see in this graph how the breakdown of what people are currently doing versus what they would be willing to do with additional resources looks like for each individual standard. But when we looked at it across the board to see how many providers are currently meeting all of the standards, we actually found that there are no providers who are at least who responded to our survey, who are currently meeting all of the standards set forth by the pre-K priority. and that no one was willing or able to meet all of the standards set forth by the pre-K priority without additional resources. But the good news is that about 57% of providers who we surveyed said that they would be willing to meet these standards and able to meet these standards if additional resources were provided. And as you can see in this graph, the quality standards that had the largest number of providers reporting needing additional supports to be able to carry out were students receiving screenings, referrals, and supports. An important thing to know about this standard is that there's really a list of different types of screenings. So a lot of programs are currently engaging in screenings, but from what we heard from providers, providing physical and mental health screenings isn't as common in our current system, and it's something that a lot of providers said that they would need support or additional resources to be able to carry out. Having a family specialist who interacts with parents was also something that was identified as needing additional resources by a lot of providers. And having lead teachers with a BK and having assistant or associate teachers with a CDA were both education standards that a lot of providers reported needing additional support or additional resources to be able to meet. We are also interested in the willingness and ability of providers to expand their services to support more students or to offer more slots to students. And what we found is that the majority of providers are willing and able to expand, though the majority of those would need additional resources. And the most common resources that were listed as being required for this expansion were assistance recruiting staff, additional funding, support for materials, building physical new space for classrooms, and renovating existing space in classrooms that might not meet the current licensing standards. And amongst the people who said that they were not willing or able to expand, the most common reason given was just a lack of physical space to hold more students. We also asked providers if they would be willing to accept local funding for a pre-K program, and the majority of them said yes, though there was a sizable minority that said that they were not sure. Amongst those providers expressing reservations, their main considerations that would influence whether or not they would accept funding would be whatever regulations or requirements were attached to that funding, and an interest in not displacing their private pay students. We were also interested in hearing from residents and childcare administrators about what the potential impacts of a pre-K expansion could look like in the future. So we asked childcare administrators what they thought the impact would be on the early childhood system. And we also talked to some of the communities in other parts of the country who have already implemented an expanded pre-K system to get their advice on things that Forsyth County should consider as it moves forward. And what we found from administrators is a lot of administrators believed that having an expanded pre-K program would really help to improve kindergarten readiness in our community. And this was brought up a lot of times in the context of administrators expressing concern about the level of readiness that children in our community have as they enter the school system. Administrators also expressed hope that an expanded pre-K system would provide equitable opportunities for all children to have very high quality pre-K experiences, and for those experiences to be in diverse settings that are socioeconomically and racially integrated. We did hear from some providers that they had concerns about the potential negative impact on private providers and the supply of teachers for children between the ages of 0 to 3. And most of those concerns centered around the information, and what we heard from them was that for a lot of private centers, because providing care for children between the ages of 0 and 3 is so expensive, they felt like it could be very difficult for them to be able to continue offering those services if their 4-year-old students were diverted to other classrooms. And that from parents and from providers, we've heard that there's already a perceived shortage of slots and capacity to care for children between the ages of 0 to 3, and some providers expressed concern that this could make that situation worse. There was a similar concern expressed about teachers, that if teachers were being paid more to teach 4-year-olds, and if that had a very high education standard, that all of the teachers that meet those education standards might shift from potentially teaching younger children to then teaching 4-year-olds, while there is still a need for very educated and very experienced teachers to be teaching children in the 0 to 3 space as well. So altogether, those concerns were just about making sure that whatever happens with an expanded pre-K system keeps an eye on how that expansion could potentially impact younger children. When we talked to communities and communities that have expanded in other places, they gave us some, there's more specific advice that you can review in the report. But overall, they said that it was really important to consider the administration on the front end, including a universal application process. That was something they strongly recommended. They also recommended that we look at how an expanded program may intersect with existing services to make sure that we're not duplicating services, but also to make sure that we've identified places where we could potentially leverage those services and leverage the opportunity to make contact with so many more families with young children. They also recommended assessing the nature and scope of IT support and data management before you start collecting the data to make sure that that's really built out as a part of the original plan for the pre-K and not something that you have to come back and do later. And they made general recommendations in making sure that you keep good timelines, set priorities, and use community leadership. And we do want to offer a special thanks to the Pre-K Priority and Family Services and the KB Reynolds Charitable Trust for making this project possible. On the next slide, there's also a list of all of the organizations that were just so generous in helping us connect to community members and teachers who participated in our surveys and our interviews. And we didn't list all of the organizations for privacy reasons that so graciously filled out our surveys and participated in interviews, but we are also very grateful to everybody who took the time to sit down and talk with us and took the time to fill out our surveys, because we couldn't have done this study without you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. What does this information and analysis mean for the Pre-K Priorities efforts to make high quality pre-K programs available to all 4-year-old children in Forsyth County? Well, here are a few of the insights that we gained from the study. We already have enough capacity for a significant expansion of pre-K. But if we're going to get up to 80 to 90% of 4-year-olds being enrolled in a universal system, we're going to need to add capacity. We also need to improve quality across all of the various settings. As Elizabeth noted, no setting meets all of the standards that have been set by the pre-K priority, whether it's in a community childcare center, at Head Start, or in the public schools. What's encouraging, though, is that most pre-K providers are willing and able to improve quality, especially if additional resources are provided. Another finding that came through the study was that parents and professionals are largely in agreement when it comes to what the standards should be for a high-quality program. But perhaps the greatest challenge is to have us redouble our efforts to bring qualified teachers into the system, particularly assistant teachers with associate's degrees and lead teachers with BK licenses. The study did find that there are quite a few teachers in Forsyth County that have BK licenses. I think it was around 165, but not all are currently involved in early childhood education. If we were to get to the point of having a pre-K program that enrolled 80% of 4-year-olds, we would probably need about 200 lead pre-K teachers. As I mentioned at the start, a good study answers the questions that you need to ask at the beginning, but a great study provides some answers that lead to new questions. This study raised some interesting questions about the state-funded North Carolina pre-K program in Forsyth County. As you saw in one of the presentation slides, about 2,765 4-year-olds in Forsyth County currently meet the income eligibility criteria for the NC pre-K program. What you didn't see is that only about 740 of those children are enrolled in a North Carolina pre-K classroom. That's only 27% of the children that are eligible. That's well below the state average of 7%, and far below the 67% of eligible children that are enrolled in North Carolina pre-K programs in Guilford County. That raises the question, why is this? That's a question that requires further study, but more to the point, the question is, what will we do about it? I think it makes the need to expand high quality pre-K in our county even more urgent. So many thanks to Forsyth Futures for providing us with this comprehensive picture of the pre-K landscape in Forsyth County. It will continue to be an invaluable guide as we go about building a pre-K system that meets the needs of our children, our families, and our communities. And now Leslie will share some of the questions that have been asked during the presentation, and continue to ask questions, put them into the Q&A box. If we don't get to all your questions this afternoon, we'll respond in writing following this webinar. Leslie?
Thanks, Bob. So one of the first questions that came up, and I think it incorporates two different aspects that are very important, and I think we are still trying to discern how to best address, but I'm going to read this question, and I think, Bob, this is going to be one that you could speak to. It says, how will pre-K priority make pre-K linguistically accessible? And that was one of the things that was very clearly outlined in a couple of the slides that Elizabeth shared with us. And then furthermore, how can pre-K priority ensure accessibility to pre-K centers if a family does not live nearby a facility?
Well, both of these are resource questions. And the question about the teachers and having linguistically diverse teaching staff really is part of a larger issue of how we recruit teachers, period. Again, one of the findings of the study was that this was an area where there's going to need to be some additional support for not only recruiting teachers coming out of college and universities, but also to enable teachers who want to get better credentials to be able to do so. So within that, we also have to be mindful that we need to recruit teachers that have skills in different languages in order to be responsive to the students and the families. And I'm not going to minimize the difficulty of this task. I think it's a challenge that our community faces across all kinds of sectors, that we make sure that we're especially responsive to the number of Spanish-speaking families and children in our community. So that has to be a part of the recruitment effort. And we'll have to look at what is entailed in being able to attract the percentage of linguistically diverse teachers that we need to our system. We do have a workforce education and training work group within the pre-K priority. It's been with us for a number of years. We have all of the education leaders from WSSU, from Forsyth Tech, Salem College. And this is an area that they are working on in terms of how we recruit and retain teachers. So again, this will just be a significant part of that recruitment effort. So that's, again, very much a work in progress and one of our major challenges. When it comes to location, one of the things that is in the study that we didn't have time for today was to look at where the centers are currently located and in what neighborhoods the 4-year-old children and the young children are located, and to see where there is any kind of mismatch, where there might be something that you could call a child development, child care desert. So that's going to be a very important part in our planning when it comes to locating where we would have the centers, to see if there is a place where, again, we might need to have a new center. That is all a part of the long-range planning process. At the present time in Forsyth County, there isn't transportation provided, through the public schools for pre-K programs, whether it's in the school district or outside. That's something that some other communities have started to address. It's something that may also require action at the state legislative level. So again, we have our work cut out for us in terms of addressing some of these transportation challenges.
Thank you, Bob. I think another thing that has been raised that's a good segue for that, talking about aspects of people in different communities speaking different languages and having different accessibility, transportation barriers. One of the questions is, how did the Forsyth Futures team go about surveying parents to really find out the needs and their thoughts about this, and making sure that all demographics were covered within the county? What was their process? So Elizabeth, could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. And I could start my video as well so you can see me. Okay, no, I cannot. So yes, I can speak a little bit to that. We did work with our community partners who, so as far as linguistic access, we distributed all of our surveys in both English and Spanish. And we worked with some community partners who could both help us connect with people who are Spanish speaking, as well as help with the translation of the surveys. And we piloted the surveys in Spanish as well to make sure that they made sense and they were accessible. And then we had just incredible community support. Leslie and Bob really helped, but there were just such an array of different organizations who really stepped up when they heard what we were doing and helped connect Forsyth Futures researchers and surveyors to parents in a variety of different settings. So we were all over the place. We were at childcare centers, we were at fairs, we were just anywhere we could be distributing surveys. And we were also making sure that we were tracking the demographics of the surveys as they came in and comparing them to what we knew about the demographics of the children under the age of 5 in Forsyth County. And then when necessary, I think it ended up being so close that we didn't end up needing to do this because we were very successful because of our community partners in meeting, but we did have plans, and I'd have to look back at my notes to see if we did it or not, to make some statistical adjustments to make sure that the survey data reflected the full population of Forsyth County.
Great, thank you. One of the other questions that's come in says, where do we stand for public pre-K statewide mandatory and being available free to all children? I would say that sounds like something similar to how kindergarten has developed over the many years. And Bob, you maybe could answer that in relation to some of the statewide work that we've done with other counties and some of the Justice Center representation that we've had at the state level.
Yes, we're not the only county in North Carolina that is seriously pursuing pre-K expansion. And there are a number of them that have been able to expand their programs, mostly through local government funding. Folks in Durham County, Buncombe, and Mecklenburg in particular. Folks from those counties and about 3 or 4 other counties in the state have been meeting regularly, including representatives from the pre-K priority. I've been meeting regularly for about the last 3 years with staff from the North Carolina Justice Center. And the focus there is what can be done at the state level. How can we influence our state legislature to increase the rate at which North Carolina pre-K program is being expanded in particular? I think right now the program only serves, as you saw, about 47% of eligible children. So barely halfway there just to serve children who are eligible for that program, let alone children from other families who have higher income but still struggle because of the expense of childcare. So again, our group meets. There are representatives, lobbyists, if you will, from the North Carolina Justice Center who are really working with state legislatures to find ways that we can expand resources, increase resources for pre-K. I think in the background of this is something called the Leandro ruling, which I think occurred some 20 years ago and had to do with the constitutional right of all children in the state of North Carolina to be provided with a quality education that will enable them to learn what they need to know so that they can succeed as adults. And this ruling was laid down by the judge 20-some years ago. It's been kind of contested all along. There's recently been a report that came out on what it would mean to put into effect the recommendations of Leandro ruling, which include recommendations for pre-K and for having a universal pre-K program. So what it really takes is political pressure. And maybe it takes, I'll say political partnership, working with our state legislatures, our legislators, to be able to really have the legislature allocate the resources that are needed to move us in the direction of a program that's available to all and that is funded with state dollars. That's been a tremendous challenge in the last 10 years. it's something maybe to keep in mind as people go to the polls in the coming election. The pre-K priority is really looking to participate actively in this election year campaign to really get out and have candidate forums, to hold town meetings, virtually if necessary, but hopefully we'll be able to do some in person as we get later in the year. But we really want to raise this as an issue that is a high priority for our state elected officials to provide the kind of funding that's needed, which is really, it's one of the greatest investments they can make in education. I won't go right now into all of the research and the studies, but it really shows that the return on investment for investments in high quality pre-K are very significant. But you have to make that investment at the start and maybe wait a little while before you get some returns.
Okay, the next question I'm going to direct towards Elizabeth. This is a question that relates to some of these the study results. It says that the parents who participated in the study that indicated their children are not enrolled in a formal care setting, what proportion of that group indicated that they would enroll their children if pre-K costs were not an option?
Certainly, and that's actually a way that we didn't break down the survey data, or we haven't broken it down yet, but we certainly could. And just so that you know, as when you're looking at the report, in the full report, we report both numbers, but in this presentation, when we looked at the percentage of children who are currently enrolled, we used data from the North Carolina Department of Early Childhood Education. They provide data on the monthly number of children who are enrolled in every facility. And then we also looked at a survey that had been done, I believe, by Child Care Resource Center about how many children are in half-day programs. So when we look at the survey data, from the way we asked the question, I believe we asked how long or where is your child for the majority of the day? And I strongly suspect, based on the results we got from that survey data, that because we phrased the question as the majority of the day, not is your child in a formal childcare program, that we maybe overlooked some of the children that are in half-day programs. So if we do run that analysis, the data will look pretty different. But my instinct would be that the majority, or that parents that aren't interested in sending their children to childcare probably are also not currently sending their children to childcare. So I think there's probably a good number of parents who aren't currently sending but would be interested. So that's something we could certainly look into.
Great, thank you. The next question I have is probably going to be for Bob. This says, will resources, including funding, be made available to unlicensed home providers to help improve their quality? Because many of the children that you referred to are attending these programs.
Yes, that's not one of the goals of the pre-K priority. Our goals are really to provide funding for licensed centers that have a particular curriculum, the other standards that you've seen in the presentation. And so that's kind of been the aim of our group. At the same time, we recognize that home care is a viable option, and that many families do opt for that, and it'll still be a choice that that families make. Fortunately, the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, who have been strong supporters of the pre-K priority, funded this feasibility study, also have an initiative called the Family, Friends, and Neighbors project. And that really is focused on the care that is provided, informal care, I think is what they would refer to it as, and to identify where that care is being provided, who is doing that, and what resources could be provided to home settings and that are not within the formal child care system. So that is an initiative of Kate B. Reynolds. I know they've been very actively pursuing that, recognizing the need for it. And so I would consider that to kind of be a companion to what we're attempting to accomplish with the pre-K priority.
Thank you, Bob. And I think I'd encourage, if anybody else has a question, go ahead and type it in now. I've got one more that I'm going to ask Bob about, and that is, where do our county public officials, since this is a Forsyth County initiative, stand in their support of this expansion or helping support with funding as we go forward in trying to talk about expansion?
Most, if not all, I think, of our local elected officials, whether it's in the county where the funding for education comes from, or the city, are supportive of high quality pre-K. I don't think there's a question then in anyone's mind that a high quality program is something that'll be beneficial to children. I think the challenge that we've run into is how does that recognition, how does that I think Kelly Bendheim once referred to it, even a passion for pre-K get translated into the money that's needed to do it. I know the Pre-K Priority Coalition did present to the county commissioners this year a proposal to expand high quality pre-K. I think this was a challenging year in which to do that. The county has just adopted its budget for 2020-21 this coming year. And they really were not looking at adding any new initiatives at the time. And that's because of the strain on budgets at the local level, the state level, because of the COVID-19 crisis. So, but we did have an opportunity to speak at length with the officials at the county level, with the commissioners, to learn more from them about what they would see as being important elements of a high quality pre-K program. And so we're going to continue to develop that partnership with our elected officials and to really, as I said before, make use of this coming electoral campaign to have candidates get on the record in terms of their support for pre-K and what they would be willing to do in terms of making sure that local funding is a part of the solution to having more slots available. So again, I think there is support. The question is, how do we make sure that that support translates into the resources needed to expand pre-K? It's going to be a strong focus of the pre-K priority in the coming months and the coming years, so that we'll be going back to the commissioners next spring with a proposal to have local support for increasing quality and increasing capacity of pre-K in Forsyth County.
Thanks, Bob. So we're going to wrap up. It looks like we've answered the questions that were submitted today. If anybody has a question following this, I would encourage you to feel free to contact me personally, and I'll make sure it gets answered. We want to thank you again for joining us today. Our thanks to the folks who were involved also in developing this webinar experience. We hope you stay connected with us and support the future of Forsyth County as we enter this next phase of the important initiative around the pre-K priority with a lot of partners at the table. You can follow us on Facebook. We also, as mentioned before, have all of the materials that were mentioned today, the feasibility summary report, the full report of the feasibility study, and many of the reports that we've done over the past 2 years that are all there for you to go to and take a look at. And we encourage you really to go to the website, not only for that reason, but to sign and take the pre-K pledge if you haven't already done that. It's really important to us to show that we can motivate over 1,000 people already, local citizens that feel this is an important initiative. And if we can get more people to sign on to that, that would be great. And there's a little button on there that says, take the pre-K pledge.
Leslie,
yes.
There is a question that came up, I saw, that I think is an interesting and very timely question. We have a couple minutes. I might like to answer it. Did you see the answer or the question? I can read it.
This one just came in. It says, knowing that pre-K education will significantly decrease the inability of young adults to deal with stress and be more likely to maintain education and avoid law problems, should we not move some resources from law enforcement to education? And that is a very timely question based, in light of everything that's happening now. So yes, Bob, please.
Well, there's a wonderful publication that an association in California of judges, district attorneys, police chiefs, sheriffs, other law enforcement officials put together some years ago. The title of it, something along the lines of Pay Me Now or Pay Me Later. And what it is an endorsement by the law enforcement community of pre-K. And these law enforcement officials view pre-K as an anti-crime measure. That the more we can invest in our young children, the more we can develop their skills, their capacities, their potentials, the more that they have a road ahead in which they can succeed, in which they can thrive in our community, in work. And again, all of the results and reports, studies of pre-K indicate that that's the case, that an investment in pre-K has those long-term benefits. So that is something that those law enforcement officials in California came out for square. I have no doubt that it's something that our law enforcement leaders would endorse here as well. So again, it's in many ways, I don't position it necessarily as an either or. You could say this is a law enforcement tool. The question is, where does the money come from? I certainly am in no position right now to say that the best way to do that is to take money from here and put it there. I would say that whether we need to do that or not, we have additional resources available that can be raised through our elected officials, through our tax policies that we need to exercise as citizens. So again, it's not that we have to have one of those or the other. I think my emphasis would be on is that if we choose to, if we have the will, we can get the resources we need to do what we need to do for the education of our young children.
Thank you, Bob. So we do encourage you to go to the website, prekpriority.org. We will be sending all of you guys that registered via Eventbrite and gave us your email. We will be sending you the summary feasibility report. And we anticipate some additional opportunities to connect with you in the coming months. As Bob mentioned, that'll probably be more in a virtual format such as this. But don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have ideas. We are continuing our public engagement planning. We are just shifting our strategy a bit with, as Bob mentioned, the COVID-19 challenges around gathering in groups. But we do thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a great week. Thank you.